following along with your splines, your top splines series, I was able to catch the first one live. I didn't catch the second one live, but I've watched it a couple of times since. And to start off, before we get into the pictures, a lot of almost all of what you're getting into with the top splines, I would have to say is pretty much on the money. And the general concepts of smaller is always better than larger. The fit is, more important than trying to cover it with something. And what we're going to look at today is not so much the way I do it, but an alternative to what happens when you can't do it that way. Because out of the hundreds upon hundreds of splines that I've done, most of them actually wind up being closer to what you've been showing in the series than what we're going to watch today. What we're going to watch today is a different method for the purposes of when you can't go small, when you have to go bigger. So I thought it was good to, look at a different aspect of it in that sense. Realizing that anytime any of us have the audacity to say, well, this is how we do it, we're in the kind of business that almost every guitar that presents itself to us is going to require a whole different toolbox half the time. The whole aspect of doing touch-up work, doing these kind of repairs, these kind of cosmetic repairs, almost requires you to, develop a, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of relationship with yourself, where you're constantly, negotiating with yourself and trying to not reinvent the wheel, but almost attack every repair as if it's not the first time you're doing it, but the first, if you're just going through every repair, this is the way I do it, this is the way I do it, then you're usually going to wind up in some kind of trouble. So with that said, and also with the concept that, especially in relationship to what we're going to look at today, that almost every repair, and this is just from my perspective in terms of when I have to enter the touch-up room, almost every repair or decent repair is going to look better under finish than even the best repair looks with finish on it. You know what I'm saying? That a quality repair, a decent repair, a well-done repair, even a mediocre repair will look a lot better under a finish than having a good repair that you're piling up a lot of finish on and hoping for the best. Some of it has to do with customer expectations, and Ian, you can verify this for me as well as a number of other people who I've never spent any time working in a guitar manufacturer. I've spent enough time in them as a guest and knowing lots of people who work at guitar manufacturers to know that the customer, the guitar owner's perception that they're getting a guitar that's a gem or pristine when it comes out of the factory isn't aware of how many repairs are actually being taking place on the factory floor, and all of those things seem to disappear under a finish fairly well, even if they're not done expertly, cutting in a spline, putting in a patch, doing some color touch-ups, and all of those stuff that wind up buried under a finish look a whole lot better to the guitar owner than, very often I'll have a guitar owner at the front counter and they'll come in and with a defect on the guitar and they'll say, here, can you take this out? We'll get to that in a second. But I'll point to several areas on the guitar that they never even knew were already repaired. Not to mention, just as a colloquialism, that when I've got a customer in front of me and somebody points to something on a guitar and says, "Can you take this out?" My usual answer is, "Well, you already did. Now it's my job to put it back." So that's that kind of mindset that we're approaching these kind of repairs. So this is the guitar that came in. This was something we did last year, before we were even on Instagram. So all of the pictures that I take, or most of the pictures I take, at least pre-Instagram, were usually for my not so much record keeping, but documentation of repairs for future reference. So if I ever have to, several years from now, try to remember how I did something so I can repeat a result, I've spent 30 years collecting those pictures up until probably about 2005 or 6, probably on 35 millimeter. So I've got like boxes of photos that I could go through that are just a reminder for me for how I did things. If I remember, oh yeah, I had a 5-piece, Gibson neck that went sideways on me when I took it apart, when I took it off the guitar, and that's how I don't remember how I did it. I can go and find it. In this case, it was mostly for the customer, so I could kind of keep him apprised as to what was going on with his guitar and why. And a lot of times I'll save these kind of pictures for customers for when they come to pick up the guitar, because very often I have a computer right by the front counter where I'll dial in, pull up one of the folder like this of their guitar, and I'll be able to go through, the pictures as we're talking about what was done to their guitar, even after the fact. And then the concept of like, oh, well, now I know why it took so long, or now I know why it cost so much, because a lot of people don't have this perception that, well, you can just take that out and put that in there, can't you? So this guy had called with he told me he had a classical guitar that had a crack and wanted to see if there was something I could do with it. And then when he showed up, I don't remember the maker. I apologize for that. And I didn't bother looking it up. But he had brought it in, and that's when I found out at the time of entry that it had already been repaired twice. And so I was the third batter on this one, and he didn't like the way it looked and was bothering him, and got to a point where he decided if he needed to or wanted to have something done about it. And at that point, I started negotiating with myself about, how much better can I do this? What am I going to have to do to get it looking better, and so forth and so such. You see down in here, how do we do that? How do I,
It's showing us
how do I drag the picture?
I
I think if you do maybe arrow keys. You might be able to grab it and move it too.
Let me get this out of the way. Does that help? There we go. So you can see down in here where the crack that was repaired was, and you can see a whole mess of area here that's miscolored. And this is what he wanted to see, if something could be done about it. That's not a great picture. If we go to the next picture, you can see what we were dealing with.
Was there a lot of extra finish on there too?
And that was part of the problem too. There was a ton of finish on the guitar. It's hard to show it. And I didn't take these pictures to demonstrate a lot of this, because I just took it for the sake of being able to, one, document what it looked like before, and then every time there was some, curiosity via email, I could just fire a couple of pictures back to the customer, and that seemed to keep them quiet for a while. But all in this area, you can see these areas here where there was heavy abrasion, loss of color here. There was darkness in here. There was loss of color in here. And then there was just a lot of darkness along the sides of the crack here. And this whole area from about this far on the side of the center seam all the way down to about this side of the bridge had a lot of material on it that I had no idea, and there was no way I was going to find out what it was. It had already been through 2 shops. Apparently the first guy had repaired it just with glue, and then with, I don't know if it was with CA or just wood glue. And he had put some cleats in there. And then that was apparently very lumpy and very wavy. And then I went to another luthier who did this repair to it. And this is actually a spline or a splint, which is what I've always called it, that's in there. It's just dark as can be. It's small, but it's dark. So I don't know what he hit it with. And then I guess trying to color over it, it probably got darker and darker and darker. I had the guy give me his name. My attempts to contact the person just to find out what I was coping with were not answered. So I don't know what I was dealing with there. There was some stuff wiped on. There was some areas that were sprayed on. The guitar had a pretty decent gloss to it right up to about here, and then it died. And right up to about here, there were lots of witness lines. And I presume that there was either some CA wiped on or because you could see the direction of the streaks. I don't know if it was sprayed and not sanded heavily. I'm not sure. So I was dealing with all of that as well. And if we go to the next picture, you can see here how dull this area is there.
Doug,
There's this.
What's the approximate value of this guitar?
It's probably in the $10,000 neighborhood.
Okay.
It's a hand built guitar. It's by a single builder. I don't remember the builder's name.
Okay.
I think I was told at the time that he's no longer with us. But at this point, it was almost like, well, that almost doesn't matter anymore. I don't know how much of this was taken off. You can see these areas here where it was abraded and darkened. You can see the color mismatch from here to in here down in this area, and here is a little bit more orange, like the rest of the guitar was. So that's where we started. So that's, my first determination was I'm doing some excavation, and I didn't know how big it was going to be. I didn't wind up being huge, but it wasn't going to be a typical, making a cut, wedging in a very small piece of wood, and then, putting some finish over it. Plus we had some other issues on top here that we were going to be dealing with. First order of business is I just taped off the area. Because all I wanted to be dealing with was the area that I had to excavate, and I'll deal with the rest later. When I'm doing this kind of job, and you can see how shiny the guitar is up here and up here, I learned how to do splint work from a guy up in Connecticut, a violin maker initially. Misha Parshanov, a Russian guy who lived up in Connecticut and builds beautiful violins. He does a lot of repair work. And he was the first one to kind of taught, and he used to do it with just a knife when he cut out his woods. Here, I'm just taping off both sides of the crack so I can begin attacking it. That is a closer picture. I don't know how close I'm going to get to the tape on either side of there. Or at least initially I didn't. So that's how my setup process is, just to isolate where I'm at. I don't want to touch the rest of the guitar. When I'm doing this kind of thing, I really don't want to invade the finish on either side of the crack, and have to do a whole lot of spraying, a whole lot of color. This is a really yellow top. My suspicion was that was less color of the wood and more color of the finish, which to me, it was fairly evident that it was a French polish finish, at least to begin with, judging how the aging of the finish, was kind of living on the rest of the guitar,
Hey,
and
Doug, really quick, what tape are you using there? Is that a low tack tape?
this is just the orange Stumac tape.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the orange stuff. It's I don't know, probably a couple of 3,000 stick. But it's just to provide an area for me to rest my hands on, and when I'm drawing the knife, I'm not scratching up the surrounding area. Here's the knife. We're gonna, do a little bit of live stuff with it later. That's the Sloan crack knife. I don't remember who I bought it from. I think Stu Mack used to sell it but it might have been LMI. I don't remember. I've had mine for the better part of 30 plus years. But I bought it when I was learning splint repairs from Misha, and he did it by hand with a knife. I saw this and immediately thought it would be, an alternative, because I didn't trust myself with a knife at that point. And it, it's adjustable, and we're going to show you how we adjust it. First thing I do when I'm setting the blade to make my initial cuts is I drop the blade this way on the table, and I get the blade flush with the bottom of the holder. Then I take a couple of pieces of tape, or usually one initially, and I'll put two pieces of tape on the bench right next to me, right next to the guitar. So this way I can drop the knife onto the piece of tape, and I can loosen this screw, and that'll drop the blade only the thickness of a piece of tape out of the holder, out of the body of the tool. So when I'm making my draw along the first cuts, that I'm just making basically a line for the rest of the cuts to follow, so that it'll score where I want to be. If I have to make any small turns, if I have to follow any figure grade line. This is a pretty straight grain guitar, so I wasn't worried about that in this case. Then we just start stacking up more tape on top of tape, and we lower the blade a little bit more each time, and we make another cut. And you can see here, I'm past whatever's in there, and I'm starting to cut into wood. Oops. As you continue that process, you just keep dropping deeper and deeper and deeper until you get through to the other side. And the blade itself, I don't know if you can see here. Oh, maybe. The blade itself gets pretty wide at the body of the blade as it goes up, and it creates a V-shaped cut as you continue down into the top of the crack.
Doug, did you work that blade at all, or?
Yeah, and I'm going to show you. I'll show you that when we actually show the tool. How you sharpen this puppy is also very important to how well it works.
Okay.
It's got to be sharp, and it's got to be sharp on a couple of different facets. Because in this case, actually, you see here, I drew through the crack, and now I'm pulling in the way up until here, I'm pulling in the direction that the tool is leaning. So I'm pulling the knife through. As soon as you start getting into a little bit deeper wood and you start to create a wall of either side of the crack, and it starts to widen, that's when I actually start pushing in the other direction.
So you've got purfling on the other end of that draw. Is there anything? Are you doing anything to mitigate cutting through purfling, or is it just?
Well, in this case, I made a decision very early on that I changed my mind about, because I knew I was going to. I don't know if I can go back. Here, I assumed I was going to cut right to the purfling. And I also assumed that I was going to cut right to the bridge. And I actually at one point considered taking the bridge off. But I was also told that the bridge has already been off and back on again. And so I already had a number of battles to do with this guitar, and I didn't know how much of a can I wanted to open. So I said, well, the bridge is on there. It's not going anywhere. Do I want to then add a bridge reglue to the bill because this is already going to be expensive? And do I really want to know what's under that bridge from previous repairs? And I elected to just stop at the bridge. Normally, like you've said in the whole series on top spline so far, normally your better part of valor is to pull the bridge so at least you can disappear up under the bridge here and you don't have two seams to worry about. In this case, I made the decision not to pull the bridge just because I didn't really want to have to deal with the consequences of what I didn't know, given some of the repairs. Plus, there were already a bunch of cleats under here. I knew I was going to have to deal with those, and it's also a lattice brace top, so I also had that going for me. So I had enough headaches as it was. I said I just don't want to go there. So back to where we were, I also made the decision that I said I wanted to see how close I could get here, because this was pretty bad, and it was right up to the purfling, excuse me. And so I said I wanted to see how close I would get. And as I was starting to work this, I guess we'll see in a couple of pictures. As I was starting to work this, and like I said, here I'm pushing on the knife rather than pulling on the knife, which is a little counterintuitive, but it works, especially if you treat the blade properly. Here, by the way, is another thing that you can see the lattice bracing in here. There's a bunch of cleats that have already been taken out here. And the other thing, to pause here and before we start getting into other stuff, you had mentioned something about in your series about wood selection. And this is also paramount to a good repair like this. You can see here how dark this side is and how light this side is. Yeah. The run out on this guitar was dramatic. We're yellowish, almost brown here, orangey. We're yellow, almost lemony on this side. And, I probably went through 40 or 50 pieces of wood till I found the one that I wanted with enough run out that I was comfortable with. And that, to me, I knew was going to be kind of half the battle. Because if I could pick a good candidate, then I wouldn't have to worry about doing any fancy dancing later, especially with a wider cut. Because when you walk around the guitar, it's gonna show. God forbid you get your grain orientation wrong, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So I went through a lot of wood, but this was just a good picture to show how how much run out there is in a case like in certain cases, and selecting the wood is important. Here also, I put a light inside of the guitar, and I was able to read through the top when I got the light bright enough to be able to tell where the braces are. Because with the lattice bracing, I also got to deal with, how much of the brace I'm going to cut into, how much of the cleat I'm going to sacrifice for the braces, because I'm going through to the other side, and there's a bunch of braces in the way. I know I'm going to do some cleating later, so I know I'll have the support that I need, at different areas of the crack, so it doesn't get wavy down the line. But so I'm also using the tape to draw on, so I know where to cut and where not to once I start getting deep enough into the top where I'm getting through to the other side. And that's what that shows there, that I'm trying not to, I'm hopping over the braces to the other side as I'm going. And here you can see that's where a cleat was that I elected not to remove on the front end, that I figured I would have an easier time once I got through it. And so here's, another look at the tool at work. Now you can see here how wide we're getting. We're getting pretty expansive at this point. If you can see through the guitar and read a book, you're getting pretty wide. And what I made the decision very early on, this is your question about the purfling, is that I cleaned this up at the edge because his cleat ended somewhere in here and it just got dark, what kind of glue he was using. So, and I could see the seam of his cleat somewhere over here. So I was hoping that I could get clean here and not have to butt up against the purfling and, not have to push that out. And I wound up with the same thing here, that I was able to get close to the bridge and clean into fresh wood because his cleat ended somewhere about here. I pushed a little bit past it and I decided to leave this because this was also a brace coming along this way. From part, it was actually coming this way. So I decided to leave this area so I could just do that with color and finish. So this way I'll have a seam over here, but if I use, the right powders, I'll be able to, mask it as a little bit of silk. Because you can also see there's a ton of silk in this guitar that was going to help me later hide stuff. So there's just another couple of shots of the Sloan knife. And at some point, I got to make a decision of how much of the underside of the braces that are coming into contact with the top I'm going to sacrifice, because I want my cleat to drop into the guitar. I don't want it to just sit over a brace. I want something for it to be glued to some degree.
Was there an arch to this top at all? Had he built an arch into it?
It was pretty flat. I mean, there was some arch to it. It wasn't a flat top. It was a little bit of a bowl to it, or a reverse bowl. It wasn't steep. There was I don't know if I've got a picture of the bridge sideways somewhere in here. We might see. If we go back to, there we go. You can see here that there's a little bit of a dome to the bridge. So there's some radius there, So back to here. So now it's time to decide how much of the braces I'm going to sacrifice. These are little knives I make to use. They're just a wooden handle with a portion of a blade in them. They cut on the pull and cut on the push, depending on which one I grab. And now we're entering into sacrificial territory. And I'm pulling the knife through just to, see how much of the cleat I'm going to, or how much of the braces I want to sacrifice. I wanted something for it to glue to and wedge in so that it's a little bit more stable. And I'm really not going very deeply into the brace, so I'm not really sacrificing any kind of structural integrity. But I wanted something to really kind of push it into. Spruce is a pretty squeezable wood, so when you're wedging it into something, it'll give and it'll find its own point of where it wants to get kind of squeezed in or crushed into those little slots I'm putting there. And that'll kind of hold it in place, because I'm not going to be doing the traditional put a big, huge piece of plexiglass on there and squish everything into place, because it's so wide open. I don't want to push the crack open more, because that's the danger when you're doing a big, wide cleat, is you're pushing a big piece of spruce. It's a little proud of the top. You get your plexiglass on top of that, you squeeze it down, and now you're pushing the crack open more. And then when everything dries up, you're going to have this kind of, wavy across the grain, peak. Now we pull the tape and we're done opening up the crack. That's how wide I wound up getting. Not tremendous, but, wide enough.
So that, does that, the knife has is trying to build a V shape into that void.
And there is a pretty good V shape in that. It's
But
hard to tell.
does it take that kind of push stroke that you were talking about to create that? Because it seems like the knife side, as you're drawing it, would probably just more displace wood than cut it into a V, I would think. But,
Yeah, that's the push stroke that does that.
Okay.
I have a little whiteboard here that we could use on one of the other cameras, but I don't think you
Can you
screen
flip?
share.
Can you flip the knife and push it both ways, or are you only pushing and pulling one direction?
You can load the knife backwards into the body and pull it in the reverse, as
Okay.
opposed to pushing. But I'm just comfortable enough with it where I know when it's ready to give.
Okay.
And it's much shorter strokes when you're pushing rather than when you're pulling. You're just it's acting like a snowplow, or at least a V-shaped snowplow. So that's how wide we wound up.
You
So
got
there,
compressed air to blow it out.
yeah, just blow it out and get rid of the chips, and you can see all of that evidence there. This was about, I can't read that from here, but it's about a 32 thousandths of an inch wide, split at this point. And I had to go that wide just to get past what was in there. And plus, my goal here was to go from grain line to grain line. I don't know how much. Yeah, here we go. So here, I was trying to get from grain line to grain line, so that the piece of wood that I was putting in, I was going to have the benefit of being in between two pieces of grain somewhere and in this area. So I was, hoping to create an illusion that there were two hard grain lines on either side of my piece of wood, rather than having a wooden splint that, interrupted a piece of grain, and, you had grain running into other grain and like that. And here's another example of how much run out there is, in terms of how dark one side is from the other. There's another shot of how wide we get. Typically speaking, how wide do you normally get on your splines? Because that's probably about, depending where it is, we're probably 28 to 30 thousandths on most, 32,000.
It's been some time since I've done that one that wide, but it comes up,
Yeah.
especially like you say, if you're pulling somebody else's work out. I had one on, who's that guy that customizes Martins and puts all kinds of crazy bracing on the inside and puts jumbo frets in it. I forget, but he'd done some splints on a I think HD 28 that had come undone. And yeah,
Dan Lashbrook.
yeah. Some of his splints had kind of popped, and so I pulled them out and redid them. And boy, they were probably about that big, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
But not
So,
often.
Yeah. Now there have been a few times that I've gotten bigger than this, but to be honest, you start getting bigger than this, you start getting bigger than, 40, 50 thousandths of an inch,
Yeah.
and you're actually you're in patch territory.
Yeah.
You're actually grafting in a new section at the top.
True that.
So at some point, you're actually just, relying on whatever bracing you have to hold up your new piece of wood that you're
Mhm.
cutting in. And if you got to get that big, you might as well get bigger,
Yeah.
and then just get out your spray gun and start doing some of that dressing. So that's where we wound up before we could start cutting wood. Now comes this tool. That's the former. I think they call it a former, splint former, or something like that.
Mhm.
It's adjustable in two ways. It's adjustable in and out this way, as well as this piece tilting down so that you create the V. That's side view. So this comes out depending on how wide you want to get. And then this piece here tilts against the center line here. This is something that that comes with the tool, and it's designed as a shelf that I've got it on backwards here. And it's designed to come across the two pieces here so that you can lay your splint in between these,
as a depth stop.
and it acts as a depth stop, and it works. Half of the time I wound up pulling it out and just reversing it and using it to hold up my pinky. Because sometimes I wind up having to adjust it so many times during the course of the thing. And then if I get it hung up on the splint and it winds up cracking the splint on me, I got to start over. So it's one of these things that I love to hate this little part of the tool and, spend more time putting it on and taking it back off than I do actually using it. But that's that tool. Here's I think I'm going backwards. There we go. So here's just a number of pieces of wood that I was testing, cutting, seeing if I can find my, grain lines lining up the way I want them to. I'm going through a series of different, sheets of spruce, different species, different colors, different grain orientation. Ultimately speaking, I'm cutting from something about this big when I'm going to wind up with something that's probably about this big. I like to start with something much, much longer, partially just because if it does snap, I've still got some of it left over. And I'm not having to go cut a fresh piece off of a billet and start the whole thing over again. But, we've got a boatload of wood selection for this kind of thing so that, we can spend the time at the front end trying to match what's going in with what's under the finish rather than having to try to make a piece of wood that doesn't match, try to. And that's, what you had discussed with wood selection. And then depending on how much, of a stock you have, I would rather spend, an extra hour, flipping through a deck of cards, looking for the right card than, having to convince that, somebody later that my deuce is an ace. So that's, where that kind of starts looking like. And then I didn't take any pictures of this part of it, but I'll take a lot of time and I'll make sure my grain orientation is right. Sometimes you can read the grain on the side of the wood to see how steep it is, and how much, elevation you have in the grain. Go ahead.
What do you mean by grain elevation?
Well, when you look at the side of a piece of wood, and when we do the live demo with a tool, I can show you on the piece of wood. When you're looking at the piece of the wood on the side cut of the wood as opposed to the top, because you're dealing with a 1/4 cent piece of the wood, the grain on the top, you have, the shark teeth, and they have a different pitch depending on how steep your grain orientation is and your run out. And that's, when you have a top like this, where you have a really dark one side and a really light side on the other, that means you have a pretty significant pitch to the grain. And that's what I'm trying to get. I'm just going through the pieces at this point to try to find the steepest grain I can find, because I know I'm going to want something that at least looks relatively similar to what I have. I don't want to do all sorts of work on a touch up and then have you move 3 degrees off center and have the that splint, scream out, here I am,
Yeah.
because the color changes or the sheen changes on how much grain orientation you've got, on how steep the wall of that grain is. And once we get out of the picture sharing, I can show you,
By the way, I can say with authority that there is
Yeah.
absolutely nothing that you can do with paint to make up for that
Oh, sure.
grain orientation difference. And if you try, when you get done, call me and I'll tell you. I'll repeat that information for you.
Yeah, you could be there for days mixing colors, and at the end of the day, all you'll wind up with is something you can patch a leaky roof with.
Yeah.
In terms of the finish you're going to do, and it still won't hide it,
No.
unless you hide it under something that's opaque, and it's not going to work. So that's where we start. Once I find what I'm looking for, I start slicing, and I start with a really long piece. Because as I'm sizing it, if it gets shorter accidentally, I still have some left over that I'm not grabbing for a new piece. And here's the action of using the tool. You're just drawing it through. There's a couple of pieces of probably 120 grit sandpaper in there. And it's just taking down the sides and making it a triangle.
That's slicing it with the knife and the straight edge. Well, that's a good way of doing that.
Right there?
Yeah.
Oh, that? Yeah.
I know because that's how I do it. So,
Yeah. That's a scalpel and a straight edge.
Yeah.
So, and plus you can feel, if you wind up in a hard grain line and it wants to pull the knife along the line, you let it and you give yourself a new edge and then move in and create yourself a new piece, rather than trying to force your knife along the edge of the straight edge. You can let the knife just ride the grain to the end of the piece of the wood, and then you have a new side to square from. And this is just pulling it through. Now, you only go in one direction. You don't go back and forth like this, because that'll break your piece of wood. You just pull it through one direction, pull it out, load it in from the top again, scrape it through. The can of compressed air that is there because you're going to create a lot of dust in between these two pieces of sandpaper that you're just going to keep blowing in to get rid of, so you don't load up in the paper. And it basically just tapers the tool. It does it for you.
I noticed you got a really aggressive grit in there too.
I do.
To that a little bit?
Well, yeah, only because if you put in like 220, 320, you'll be there for a week. I'm trying to take as much material off as fast as I can, only because I want to see the triangle start to take shape. I don't want to spend a day forming a splint and decide that one I'm not holding it square to the tool enough. And you can get off center with the tool where you wind up with a lopsided triangle and a piece of wood that's not necessarily going to help you.
Do you grit down afterwards, or are you okay with those 80 grit?
I'm okay with 80 grit.
Okay.
Because, like I said, spruce is an eminently crushable wood. It's like a sponge, so it'll press nicely in there, and then after you put your glue in, it'll swell up.
Yeah.
And I've got a nice scored wall, for it to sit against the other wall.
I would think those 80 grit marks would almost act like too thin marks. Like it would maybe grab that tight bond a little bit better, but I don't know.
It could. My perception of it is that I've got enough raw wood there that and enough of a tight fit that the glue will do what it needs to do, which is penetrate into the grain of either side of what I'm gluing into,
Yeah.
The top or the splint. So that after I've done pulling it through, I'll start to test fit. And I don't know if I have any pictures of the test fitting, but this is what I wound up with. It's sitting on its side. It's hard to tell from the picture that it's a triangle because I don't, you can see down here that I've got 3 or 4 extra pieces. I'm also jostling back and forth, deciding which one I think fits best, which one I think looks best, which one, if I get grain skipping off and disappearing halfway up on me, maybe I don't want that one. And I don't want to be married to one piece of wood at this point, because then if I don't like it, then I got to kind of start all over. So I do a lot of this to a lot of different pieces of wood before I get to this. And before even tempting to go over and say, oh, let me go see how this one looks, I'm going to take 3 or 4 of them and size them up and get them ready to start fitting. And the one that I like the best is the one that is going to get the final fitting for how I'm doing. And here I am slipping it in. You can probably see here that this side has a pretty wide wall to it on the top of it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell here, but this is very thin on the bottom. And it's slipping through, and you would be able to flick it from the inside. It's sitting deep enough.
Doug, do you think that width is wide enough that within reason, if the 2 sides of the crack are maybe a little off, like, do you have enough material there to bring those kind of in line, or are you still having to worry about the line of the top a little bit?
I'm not worried so much about the line at the top, just because, like I said, the tool, since it's feeding the blade out uniformly, I'm creating a channel that's pretty. Here we go.
So you're
pretty all the way up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a lot of waviness going on, and I don't have a lot of chipping going on. But that's pretty uniform. There's a couple of wide spots here, so, but like I said, it's kind of the kind of thing where it's pretty compressible. You can see a brace coming right across here.
Yeah.
So I'm not too worried about trying to create a wavy piece that's going in. It can be straight.
Well, no, I mean more like the level of the top between the 2 sides of the crack, but like.
Oh, well, it's pretty level. With the lattice bracing, it's pretty stable.
It's pretty stable. Okay.
Yeah. If I was worried about that, I would cleat here and here, or maybe even 3 cleats.
Little pre-cleat.
Yeah, I'll just put cleats in, that are just holding the crack in place while I fit my and then I'll go ahead and I'll cut into those cleats, letting and then I can just go in with a magnet with sandpaper later and just kind of, take everything off mechanically. But here there was so much lattice in this guitar that it was not a worry to me. So here's the fitting, and that's where it winds up sitting. It's still pretty tall. It's not pushed in yet. And you can see here, I've knocked off a piece of my cleat because I want to see how it looks against the top.
Oh, so okay. So you've trimmed it down and you're just kind of getting a gauge of it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking at your run out in that little section?
Mm-hmm. And there are when I was cutting my test pieces, decide which piece of wood is going to be, I'll cut some pieces, and if I'm really not sure about it, before it's formed, I'll take a bunch of slices of spruce and I'll wipe finish on them. So then I can do get the light behind my head and move the piece so I can see if it's got a light side and a dark side. In this case, I was going to look for a light side, one that had a pretty intense run out, so that I can try to get close. But that's the piece in. I don't know if I have do I have a picture where? I guess I don't. I thought I had a picture of this splint with the section cut out. But that's, glue going in, just swelling it up as much as I can. This here is a little indexing pin that you would use in a drill press to center it on something. And that I'm going to use as a rolling pin. And I'm going to run that back and forth along this to press the thing into place. Like that. That's after wiping up the glue. You can see here, again, the area that I trimmed out because I want to know how deep I'm going, and I don't want to go deeper than that. I don't want to push this thing in and wind up, pushing the wood aside and wedging it even more, because the top side of this spline is wider than my opening. So that's also why we can make that cut right there, because I don't want to go too deep, and I don't want to force this thing in to wedge it open. I'm not trying to open the crack even more. I'm just trying to get this to sit. And then this is where it sits to dry. We don't try clamping it in any harder than that.
So do you have to resist the urge to start working it immediately?
Yeah, very much so. You
want to see how it looks now.
Yeah, half of the time I want to almost like snap that top piece off. You know how you can bend spruce and just.
Yeah.
But this is how you get it loose. You just cut it with a blade. Normally I would put down some kind of tape, or I would tape the blade itself. But I already knew I was going to be doing some work on the top of the guitar, because you can see here how much difference there is in. We had a bunch of different sheens in terms of different materials. There was a different material here, a different material here. There were witness lines running up and down this way. There was other stuff here. You see how dark some of this is here and how dark it is over here. That's the thing completely off. Then we go in with a little knife, and I just clean up the edges just to make them flush and give it a haircut. Now here is, I think, where I probably stopped taking pictures.
What kind of knife is that, Doug?
That's just a little chisel.
Okay.
That might even be one of those little dog leg chisels.
Yeah, a little micro chisel.
Yeah. Just to pick off, those little hairy pieces that are sticking up, And at some point I just kind of stopped taking pictures because I stopped communicating with the customer altogether at one point.
You had enough proof of life pictures?
Yeah, I just, it got to a point. Plus, this is also where, beyond this, is now where we're entering touch-up work.
Okay.
And, when I'm in the finishing room, both doors get closed. The phone gets turned off, or at least the ringer does. And, I start getting into my Jekyll and Hyde mode, because I've always been on all of the above kind of finisher. And so it's like, I start negotiating with myself what I want to do. Up until this point, I knew how I wanted to attack the thing physically. But then I'm sitting there going, okay, do I want to do shellac with powders? Do I want to do super glue with the super glue powders? Do I want to do pens? Do I want to spray it on? Do I want to do lacquer? Do I want to, so it's kind of thing where, do I want to use liquid dyes and then it becomes kind of a negotiation with myself, and I start messing with, either sacrificial guitars on the side or just test pieces to decide which way I want to go. And I get kind of so lost in it that half of the time I forget to keep taking pictures.
Yeah. There's also the jinx factor of taking a before picture. I don't know what it is, but
Yeah,
It sets an expectation for my after picture that I don't think I've ever met. But
so at that point, this is what I wound up deciding to do. This is what I affectionately refer to as dry staining. We're using shellac, we're using trays, and we're using powdered color. Each tray usually gets its own color, and then I start diluting it from one well to the next. This one I know is going to be dealing with, this is yellow, this is amber, and this is a little bit of black, which would eventually wind up being gray. And then other colors I get into, for a job like this there's some white pigments and some earth tone pigments to hide any seams or anything like that. And then I think I just stopped taking pictures at one point. But I did take pictures at the end, but here's another view of these are furniture powders.
the furniture mount powders, you mean the Mohawk Blendall, or what's the brand on these?
I don't remember. This kit is still, I bought this 30 years ago. So I don't know if it was Bellin down back then or where I got it. All of these wells at one point were filled. So I'm working my way through it, but you use so little of it, it'll last you forever. This side is dyes. So we got like a brown dye, almost like a Van Dyke brown. We got a medium brown. We got blue. I probably didn't, when I first put this kit together, I probably didn't do such a great job of, if I thought about it again, I probably just would have used a different jar for each color, because you got to be super careful that you're not transferring one color to the next, or spilling anything over. Because if you're working with blue and there's accidentally some orange in there, which is right next door, you've got issues. So it's the kind of thing where when I put first, this wasn't the tray that they came in. I just put them in there because at the time I thought it would be a really good idea to have them all in one box that I could just drag to the bench and do my stuff. Not realizing that, of course, I'm not going to need blue, black, red, and purple all at the same time or whatever. So here I'm getting ready to start painting. This I put in there just to show a trick. When I start painting, I often put a clamp somewhere on the bridge or nearby on a caul, like a plexi caul or something like that, because then I'm leaning my pinky against this, and this becomes an anchor for me to hold my brush so I don't get all sorts of shaky when I'm trying to just barely touch the brush against something. I don't want to try to have to keep my hand suspended above the guitar. So I'll just take out a caul, put on a clamp nearby. So then when I get the back of my hand in here, my fingers are coming around this side and I can be resting on the guitar here. If I'm resting on the guitar, I put down a cloth or something like that, so I'm not, sweating all over the guitar.
It's very thoughtful.
This is pretty much after touch-up, I realized, oh shit, I got to take some pictures. That's where we're winding up, close to it.
That's really good.
It's getting there. It's not done yet. But here's kind of where I stopped and said, okay, this is, where I want to finish up. This is actually about 2 weeks after I started color. Because when I'm doing this kind of thing, there's a ton of get up and walk away time. I'll get so far, I'll get a certain amount of yellow in, or I'll get a certain amount of, blushing in, or I'll get a certain amount of white in to hide whatever difficulties I'm doing, trying to overcome. And I'll say, you know what? That's enough for now. Let me come look at it tomorrow with fresh eyes. And I've got enough work in the shop that a guitar can sit there for weeks, having me come back to it in little spurts. When I'm doing that kind of a repair, that's where dry staining works wonders. And I'll show you that in a little bit.
Can I ask a couple questions really quick before we get into that?
Hmm?
Did you put down any kind of, are you working on top of a sealer coat? Did you go to bare wood with, on this
No, I
one?
never, I never go to bare wood in a
Okay.
job like this. If you go to bare wood in a job like this, that spruce is going to suck in your color like a thirsty sponge,
Mm.
and it's going to get dark, and it's going to get dark fast. And there's no way you're going to be able to back your way out of that, because the only way to do it is mechanically. And if you're already at the level you want to be, and I'll show you a couple of tricks of what I use to get the splint under finish later, because at this point, it's hard to see here, but this is no longer level with the top. That's if you look here, you can see that I'm below the level of the top. I've sanded that back, so I'm filling a well, because I don't want this to be flush with the surrounding finish, because I don't want a repair that I'm just sticking finish on top of.
Mhm.
I want a repair that winds up being under the finish that's level with the surrounding finish.
You want your splint to be level with the parent wood.
Right. So I want this to be ultimately underneath what I'm finishing over it with, whether it's French polish or whether I'm spraying or what have you. So this way I don't wind up with a repair that has this, that looks good, but as soon as you catch it in the right light, you have this lump, this speed bump that shows up running halfway across your guitar, where you've got kind of built up finish on top of a repair. I want to build up that finish inside the cloth so that I'm, coming up to level with the surrounding finish, maybe a little bit over it. So then I'll scrape the finish flush, and then I can either buff or French polish or whatever I'm going to do. In this case, I French polish.
Doug,
Yeah.
can you describe how you sand that to get that?
Yes, I can. And I'm going to show you that when we get to the live stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. So then, that's after color. And then we have after French polishing. This is where we wound up.
That looks really good.
So that, or that might actually, I don't know if that's, I think that's after French polishing. That could be right before French polishing.
Did you find
Sure.
that French polishing, did that get a lot of those layer lines in kind of the previous work?
Well, this actually might be before French polishing, because I sanded a lot of this off. You can see there's a little yellow left here from the previous repair that I decided at this point I didn't want to go any further, because I didn't want to open up a can of worms of stuff that I had to, start building a finish from bare wood nearby. The reason why I did all of this within a trough with all of this undisturbed on the outside is because I don't want to have to start recoloring all of this. I've got a piece of wood here that I don't want to have to start sanding into raw wood, and then you get these lines of off colors, and all of the oxidization of how long it's been around changes, and then you have different shades that you wind up drawing your way across, and your repair gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you wind up convincing yourself that you need to refinish the whole top, and then you might as well pack up and go home. So that's, and then here, okay, this is after French polishing, because here you can see how glossy the top is, and that's all done. That's after French polishing. You can see how yellow this all got. I used a little bit of yellow, a little bit of amber to dress all of this in. You can see how shiny the top is right up to the bridge. I don't know how close I can get in on that, but that's the finished repair. And you can see that there's still a splint there. It still exists. We didn't hide it. There's no way to make it go away, but we can diffuse it. That's done with a little bit of the furniture powders. This is also one of the benefits of French polishing, because you can, if you use a little bit of pumice stone when you're French polishing, that'll create a little bit of, for the lack of a better word, a little bit of milkiness in the finish that diffuses and confuses the eye from what it's seeing. It softens some of the edges of the Here's another one close up.
So that pumice stone's being transferred into the finish.
That's being I use pumice stone on the guitar in the finish when I'm padding on. I have, and I'll show you my French polishing rig when we get out of the pictures. I have a little like salt shaker almost of where I shake pumice stone onto the guitar and then polish on with the wet pad, and that does get transferred into the finish, and whatever color you're using for your polish for your shellac and when you're varnishing on, when you're polishing on, it'll take the color of the spirit varnish, and it kind of creates and I don't want to say milky, but it creates a diffused,
little hazy.
Well, not hazy, but it's almost like when photographers will put a little bit of a what do they call it, a screen, so to soften the edges on a photograph or something like that. Same thing's happening here, where this is, this whole area was softened a little bit. And what I tried to do here was I tried to get this a little dark coming up here because I wanted to mimic this.
Yeah.
And then as I started doing that, I stopped myself because my initial impulse was to darken this as dark as this was, and also darken this up here as dark as this was. And I French polished the whole top. And that was my initial impulse because I wanted to try to make it look like it was book matched with what was going on over here. And I was even tempted at one point to try to recreate this over here. And I stopped myself and I said, okay, stop, you've done enough. It looks good. And I don't want to get too dark, with this. And I don't want to get too deep in the woods. And I made the decision that this should stay lighter, because now when you look at this guitar as just somebody who's looking at the guitar, this is where you're looking. I'm not even looking over here anymore, because when I look at the guitar, the dark stuff pops out at me when I'm a casual observer of the guitar, So I don't want to add any more attention to that.
Yeah, I think that's why. It's also like, in my experience, trying to do anything dark with dyes or pigments to mimic grain features, like it just never does the same thing that like trying to do those paint things. It's almost like you're fighting the same thing that you're fighting with the run out, which is, you'll get it looking good one angle, but as soon as you move it onto another angle, it looks like a big streak of paint there.
Well, the neat thing with dealing with spirit varnish when you're French polishing is that you could recreate this fairly convincingly.
Yeah.
With it, if you get a really tiny pad going, and you get the right colors in your shellac, and then you're just wiping, kind of taking off back and forth, and recreating that over here just to give it a mimic of a look. And since it's obviously translucent, it'll be convincing. You're not actually painting it on more than you're kind of rubbing it a little dark and giving it. But it's not. I decided it wasn't worth trying to chase after. It wasn't worth trying to, do anything fancier than I already did. At this point of the repair, my, inner devil's advocate was saying you probably got a good 7, almost 8 out of 10 here. So stop, don't try to get any better.
I thought you're going to say hours.
This one I probably got, I can't remember how many hours I probably got. I probably have a good 5 or 6 hours in this, in the finished part of it, 4 or 5 hours, but in half an hour sprints,
Yeah.
So lots of visits, lots of walking away time. I think the total, I forget how much the total repair on this one billed out at, because I also did fret work on this one. There was no other structural stuff other than having to remove the cleats and stuff that was there beforehand. So it was the crack and then some fretwork and a setup. And I think the whole repair wound up being probably about 2,500. When I was done, 20, it was in the twos. I don't remember exact number. I know he left me a deposit, and his balance was, a little bit better than 50% because there was some extra time involved. But so I think the balance was in the.
We should probably get into the demo stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how do I do a stop share at this point? Is that what I do?
Yep, stop share.
Okay.
Hey,
All
Doug.
right, so that's that part of, hey. So can you see this? Is that a good view of that?
Yeah, I think Ted, you're gonna want to do cameraman stuff. I think if you want to pin the one with, are you using the yellow piece of wood?
Well, this is just the platform. So just to draw a couple of pictures first on this whiteboard thing. When I don't know if this is upside down or not, but when you're looking at the top, if we looked at a cross section of the top, you're cutting this into the wood. See what I'm saying? Or is that upside down?
It's upside down, but that's fine. I mean, I've got a perfect.
I'm just seeing you drawing. And holding it up.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think
BMC.
you need to look at the Dougie Fresh one. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And when you filled, you wind up with that. After you cut flush, you wind up here. The problem a lot of people run into is this is where they start color, and you wind up with putting color on, and you wind up with this dome that you create of material that you keep.
It's pretty common occurrence. You
Yeah.
see that.
So
And
what we're going to do here is when we get into changing the color of it, I want to create that. I want to create that in the top that I'm going to fill. I don't want a straight cut of a channel like that, because then all my color is going to wind up here and here when I'm brushing in. And you wind up with seriously dark lines on the sides. So you want a well, or at least I do, want a well that as I'm coloring it, I can feather in and it'll hold my material until I come flush. So that's how I'm working my way up from color to clear as I'm filling the length of that crack. I don't know if everybody saw that or not. So now, if we want to pin the Doug Turnit one, we can talk about the tools. Is there a way to do that, Ted?
I've got mine pinned. I think Ted's.
Yeah, it's all set on the recording.
Yeah, so everybody's got to manually pin
Okay.
Dougie Fresh or Duggernit.
Doug Turnit, yeah, that's what we need. So this is the tool here. So you are, here's the blade in the tool. Let me take it out. The blade will come out this way. you can see, there we go, that it's cutting that side.
Yeah, you just have to hold your hand up behind it so that you get the contrast right, but. Ah, you can kind of see it's got the bevel on both sides there.
Got a steep bevel on one side and a steep bevel on the other. Right there. And then it's got a flat side to it here. On this side here. That drawing through the crack that way is going to spread everything open deeper and deeper and deeper it gets. Preparing the blade is super important. It's laying on the stone here, tilted up by pressing it down, and I draw back. That's all I do. I'm not pushing it forward. I don't want to do this. And I keep going until I get my scratch pattern all the way up the blade. So I will do one side several times. Where I'm working that out.
What stone is that?
This, shout out to my buddy Aaron. This was my birthday present this year. These are, what are they called, Aaron? Yoga stone. Yoga.
They're Atoma diamond plates.
Atoma diamond. I thought it had something to do with yoga.
So you finally started using them.
I have. This is my birthday present this year. Although, just in case anybody shouts anything out, Aaron does not know what my birthday is.
When?
Or when my birthday is. What date?
He refuses to tell me when the date is. He just thinks I'll compile a general list of the gifts I've given him and take an average and one day come up with the right day.
This just means that, like, at any given point during the course of any year, I'll get surprised with the birthday present when I didn't expect it. That's
yeah,
all.
pretty much.
Which grid is that one, Doug?
This one is a 1200.
1200. All right.
Yeah. So
It has
the
the
reason
400 and the 1200.
I'm only pulling is because I want a nice sharp point here. And but I don't want to create a micro bevel here. I don't want to create a different angle than what's already here. Then once I've decided I've got something that's pretty sharp, which it already is, then I spend a ton of time here. I might jig it up to make sure I stay perfectly flat if I'm dealing with a fresh blade, but I want to make sure that this blade is square and sharp on this edge as well as this edge. So when I'm pushing that blade through the crack, this piece right here is acting like a little, little plane. Here, this piece here is acting like a little plane, forcing the wall of my crack into, I don't know if you can see it that way, forcing the wall of my crack into that V shape, and getting me something that will be a convincible V, depending on how steep I want to get. It also dawns on me, by the way, that Michael Baskin and what Jamie Rodman, that tool they came up with for the purfling cutter would actually make a wonderful crack knife as well. Because some of those blades are beautiful and would work wonderfully as a crack knife if you took the shaft out of the body of the tool and just used that as your crack knife, working that way as well. I was just thinking about that the other day. But getting this blade sharp on the back end of the blade this way is, important to be able to have the tool do its work for you. Before you enter it into the body again, I will bring this closer. Actually, I'll try to bring this closer. Go. We'll put this puppy in a vise. This part should be something to loosen it up with. So I can take that out completely. This piece here, let me just get the this side here, we look that way. This side of the tool, when you loosen it, moves this leg of the tool in and out. So if you're dealing with a really wide spline, you've got plenty of room in there to work with. Here, when we do it from the back of the tool, you got plenty of room to work with to get your piece of wood down in here. Should have cleaned it up before we started. But you can get your piece of wood in here, and then this will also tilt in and out at, you know, virtually any distance from where your 0 point is. So before I start cutting a piece of wood, and actually before I start sharpening my knife, before I start truing on my knife and just honing it for the cut, I'm going to put my knife in here, and I'm going to get this down at the bottom of my jig. And now I've got a jig, if that's at the right angle, I've got a jig where the bottom of this cut is the same shape as my knife.
Because that's a much more subtle angle on there than you would think, right? Like that jig for producing the spline can make an angle that has no relationship with the knife, right?
Correct. So that's why I'm using the knife to create the shape. If I've got a much bigger spline that's going in, and this is a much wider spline, and I've got two walls to a very wide spline, or at that point almost a patch, where I've got a triangular shaped edge to either side of the thing, and this is much wider open, then it's important to use this thing, where this is coming in here and acting as something to hold your piece up, your piece of wood. So here I've got, you know, some different pieces of wood. You know, if I've marked my end for my grain orientation for where I want to draw from, and then it's just a matter of just letting it set in here. Let me try a thinner one because I cut it pretty thin. And you start drawing it through.
Want me to wheel that closer to you?
No. So then you start drawing it through from the top where you're barely just fitting it in, and you're squaring up any of the difficulties of what you have with your initial cut. So here, I've got a wider part there. Lock everything in here. I don't think I locked that in there. You're just drawing it through. I stand behind it and let the sandpaper do the work. And I'm just doing that. I get to the point where I get stuck in there because I've got a little wider piece of wood than I have here. then I don't try to force it. I pull it and I move it up in the tool. And once it starts to take the shape of the tool, it gets easier and easier to move through there, because the wood originally is square and it's getting all hung up on the edges. Now I'm starting to get it. And you'll be here forever. It'll be a
Like
while.
if that breaks on you and you need to curse, do you prefer blasphemy or misogyny to relate?
Oh, it gets colorful.
Both.
And you can feel it hang up, and then if you got to learn when to stop.
Yeah.
If you're not really comfortable with the tool initially, this, when it's got the nut on there, I took it off. It's got a little nut that locks you into place. This will ride up and down on this side of the tool, and you can adjust height so that it'll prevent you from going below it. Which one was that? Here we go. It'll prevent you from going below a certain depth so you can stroke more aggressively. But I find myself so many times having to stop and adjust that I just normally put it on backwards, use it as a rest for my pinky. So I'm guiding the height of the tool this way. So I'm not letting it go lower than that, so it doesn't get pinched in the tool. And now I'm just looking for it to get to the point where it's smooth and it goes through easy and it takes off all the high spots. If I want to get a little bit of a more aggressive cut, I'll cut down that way. And you just keep going. And when you get to the bottom, or you get to the point where you feel it's time to start testing a fit, I'm getting to the point now where this is almost the same thickness here as it is up here. But it's there we go. It's starting to turn into a triangle.
Cool. Hey Doug,
At
I'm
least-
starting to see some trick-or-treaters outside of my house. Can we I don't mean to rush you, but should we look at the painting part?
Sure.
Or did you have more to go on the fitting part?
No, that's pretty much it. That's the tool. That's all it does. It does it well, and it's there's no more magic to it. You just keep using it until you get to the point where you can start stuffing it into the crack. Now here, whenever I'm doing color, I don't know which camera you want to pin
I like that
to.
you've got glass. Is that glued to the glass?
No,
Okay.
whenever I'm mixing color, I like to do it on glass because I'm a neat freak.
Mhm.
And it's easy to clean. It's easy to get a mess on, and then you could just, take it off very easily. I will put.
I must be a dirt freak. You've seen my bench, right? It's just littered with paint.
Well, in my old finishing room, things got a little bit unruly. Keep in mind, we only moved in here just under 3 years ago. So it's, if you're starting fresh, you can.
Got a new leaf to turn over.
Yeah. So one more thing about the jig really quickly, just as a side, as I mentioned, is that, I don't know what, are we still looking at Doug Tennant?
I'm looking at. I got a good. Yeah, Doug Turnett.
Okay, so this, for example, if you have a very wide spline that is almost reaching the territory of a patch, I normally make myself a small block that I'll slip into the crack that matches whatever taper I'm looking for in terms of the edges of that thing. And I'll use this to put this in the jig to create the V shape that I'm looking for, and I'll let this tell me what the tool V shape rather than guessing like that. And that's if you're getting pretty wide, you know, and I'll make a block for each one that I do, and then it'll just wind up in the scrap wood bin or in the garbage because it's only serves one use. So here, when you're doing dry staining, and I'm doing it in shellac, you can use almost any medium you want. You doing it with lacquer isn't very good because you need too much solvent to turn it back into a liquid. So this is straight shellac here. You can use, you can also use Qualisol. Qualisol for novice French polishers is a joy to use. It's basically a shellac base that has some oil already in it and plasticizers to make it flexible. And you don't need to use oil when you're French polishing. It's almost like a self-lubricating finish. And it's if you're new to French polishing, start with this because it's fantastic to learn with in terms of getting your technique together and, you know, learning when not to stop and so forth and so such. So before we get into color, we're going to look at this. I made this up. By the way, if we also, I'm going to take the same guy and I'm going to bring him over here. Did I lose?
Dr. Net has gone away. There we go.
Am I back? Okay. Here, just to show you how I'm going to prepare, turn that off, how I'm going to prepare the wood and sand it. That was, I think, Joe Golden asked about that.
I did.
Before it's sealed, I'm going to, oh, there we go.
Doug, I can't help but notice that you still have a supplementary sound hole on that guitar.
Yeah, this was a student guitar that was not worth fixing. And so I use it as a sacrificial lamb, you know, when I'm trying something I shouldn't do on a customer's guitar. So here, before these are sealed, if those are our splints, I want to sand them to that not half moon, but crescent looking bowl cut that I was drawing on the whiteboard. This is a spring pin. I think it's called a spring pin. If anybody knows what it's actually called, please tell me. But it's almost like a Cartier pin, but it's a steel pin in the form of a tube. It's got a slit down the middle. They come in a wonderful variety of sizes. You can buy them in any hardware store. But I think they're called spring pins. And they're designed for when you're trying to fit another piece of metal against another piece of metal. And you drill a hole, and you force this into the hole. And the fact that it's got a split in it forces it to compress in the hole and acts like something to lock up against. But I use these to make my round with, or my round bottom shelf that I'm going to paint in. Each one of these has a little slit in it. I will take a piece of whatever grit sandpaper I want to use. In this case, I just grabbed a piece of 400. And I'll cut it to the width of my pin. I slide it in the slot and I roll. And I stop when I get once all the way around. And now I can create, and I can sand that well in the bottom. Or the top of my spline, actually, in this case. And that's how I create that shell that I'm going to be painting in. That was to answer Joe's question.
Doug, that's a really great idea. That's like mind blowing. That's awesome, man.
That's just to create that stuff. And I'm not going super deep. It's not, you can see that there. It's already getting round and it's not very deep, but it's deep enough so that when I put finish on it, I'm building up to the surrounding finish, but my edges are feathered to near where the surrounding finish is. So I don't get that dark. I don't have a place where all of that stain is going to gravitate to in a sharp corner if I'm sanding with something square or if I'm using a chisel or anything like that. So after it's sanded, then it's got to get sealed because we don't want to be staining on raw wood. Anytime you get anything wet, let me see. Anytime you get anything wet on raw wood, that's going to happen. It's just going to suck any color up you got. It's going to get super dark. And now we're committed for all eternity for having to try to back our way out of, a too tight a parking spot. And so that's why we seal everything we do before we color it. At least I do, because I want to be able to have a palette that I can work on that if I need to remove color, I can, and I've got some protective barrier between me and the piece of wood I'm working on. And I can get the material off. This little piece of wood here, are we back centered on that?
Yeah, we're good.
This I've already sealed, so it's already got a protective barrier, and I'm going to grab some.
Are you sealing with shellac? Just a couple brush strokes, or?
It depends on what my job is. If I'm anxious to get to it, I can even I'll seal with super glue sometimes.
Yeah.
Usually I'll seal with shellac or lacquer, something that I want to have a good protective barrier. If I have a sneaky feeling that I'm going to want to start taking off the color I've already put on because I'm not sure of my mix yet, I'll go with CA because it'll create that much more of a protective barrier for me. If I do it with shellac and I'm painting with shellac, then I'm starting to pull off with the same solvents that I'm putting on with, and then it can get a little dicey. But I'll just take a little bit.
Hey, Doug, what thickness CA glue would you use?
Water thin. I like for doing something like that, the whatever glue boosts super thin for the finish stuff is. What is that called, Ian?
It's got the red label, right?
We talking fill and finish, or are we talking master glove? Fill and finish is just the thin. They only have thin and
the thin stuff. I also do like. I'm a big fan of Starbond too. They've got a really good what they call super fast thin super glue that's wonderfully like water. I mean, it's just a really fast glue. If I've got a top where, like over at the cedar top guitar we just looked at, that is really going to suck in fluid, then I'll go with the glue boost because I don't want it to penetrate and I don't want it to darken. I just want it to sit on top. So in this case, I think I used the Glue Boost fill and finish thin.
Okay.
So
Cool, thank you.
I typically will use one brush for mixing, one brush for painting, because I don't want to get them all mushy. This, by the way, so I'll show it to you. That's my French polishing rig. We've got, these are Johar spirit varnishes. They come in clear, you know, and all sorts of different colors: brown, golden brown, yellow, amber, what have you. It's a whole variety of different varnishes for French polishing. I've got my alcohol for French polishing and my alcohol for cleanup. I've got oil for French polishing, and whatever other stuff. This is what I was talking about before. This is pumice stone, and I have something to show you on it. This is pumice stone with just some muslin on the outside, and I can salt any kind of amount of powder I want while I'm French polishing, so that it, you know, picks up the color and the shellac and starts to not cloud up, but get, you know, a little bit of a filter of a softening effect if I'm trying to soften some hard lines. But that's what that rig is. Maybe sometime we'll do a French polish in Kings, because I think that would help some people too.
That'll be for Sheen Kings.
Sheen Kings, right? So here I grab my powders, and I'll typically do this with.
Doug, do not knock that off your bench.
I've been spending 30 years telling myself that. I've never done it backwards like this, so this might
Well,
be
you've
the first
got
time.
the top of the lid hanging off in such a way. I'm just like, oh no, not on my watch, man. You're not knocking that off on my watch.
I want one thing of alcohol here. Another thing of alcohol here. And then I'll typically get
Look
one
at you
thing.
getting your brush cleaner lined up before you even start.
Oh yeah.
It took me turning 50 to figure that out.
And then I'll put a little bit of clear off to the side. And that, so we can see everything, is where I'm starting. I'll use a little bit of a bigger brush to mix than I will to. The reason why I've got two brush cleaners is because I always leave one perfectly clear, and this one is my cleaner. That one is to activate my brush. I'll keep some paper towels nearby. I'll keep some, there we go. I'll keep some Q-tips off within arm's reach, just because if I get color on here that I want to get off right away, I'm going to come in, pick up some alcohol, and get it off right away. That's why we want to seal, and that's why we want to, you know, have that available to us and always within reach. I typically use a different tray for each color, so I don't wind up, you know, painting myself into a corner, and I don't wind up with too many choices on one tray. Plus, the reason why I'm using something like this for a single color is I'll continue to dilute or mix with other colors as I go in. So I'm going to start with a little bit of finish. I'll just take it from here. And let's say we're going to start with, since I'm upside down, I want to start with a little bit of yellow. This is my yellow here. I'm just going to pick a little bit up on the brush. Sometimes I'll pick it up with, a little scoop. Sometimes I'll pick it up with a scoop and bring it over to my tray and just leave the powder in there so I'm not moving back and forth with a brush constantly. But I'll pick some up with my brush and then I'll go into one of the wells. Believe it or not, that's yellow. Looks really dark, which it is. First order of business, clean the brush, because that's not the color I'm going to wind up with. And clean the brush. Then I go to this and I make sure the brush is perfectly clean. If this changes color on me, I know I don't have a clean brush. That's why I'm always using two. This is what I'm using to clean the brush. Once it's clean, this is one where I'm using to both activate the brush and make sure I do have a clean brush. If I dip the brush in here after I've dipped it in here and there's still color on it, this will change color and I know I've got a contaminated brush and it's time to clean some more. So here, we're going to pick up this and we're going to pick up this and we're going to move it over here. Now we're looking more yellow. So you can see why I use a different tray for each color, because I'm going to dilute as I go. So here's my concentrated color. Here's more of a yellow ambery. And then I'm going to clean my brush again. And pick up, get some of that off of there. I'm going to pick up some of this and move it over here. Clear, pick up some of this, move it over here. So now you can see where I've gotten dark, lighter, and lighter. I'm telling myself, this to me looks good. So that's where I'm going to start bringing that in and brushing it in. Not turning too much yellow enough yet, so I'm going to bring a little bit more over.
Doug, you ever seen those Mohawk kits that have like the convex glass mixing thing? Have you ever messed around with one of those?
No, I never have. What is it? A convex glass?
It's like
what?
convex glass, and their whole thing is that they put it over the thing and then mix onto the glass, and it's supposed to give you an accurate read of what your color is doing. I've never had an opportunity to play around with one.
I haven't. What I do, one of the tricks I do use is, where did I put it? Up here somewhere. I keep glass microscope slides, nearby, so that if I'm not really sure about a color, I'll drop that on here. And then if I'm going down, I'll come here and I'll take, oh my goodness, that's way too orange. And that's, that's going to get me into trouble. And I really don't want to be there yet. So I'll very often use a glass slide, move it on and off the finish. You can see here, I've got something that's left over from a recent touch up of me using, and I'll check to see if, whatever color I'm doing, if I'm dialing in what I want. Now that's so far yellow, it's doing okay. I want a little bit of orange in there. Here's my orange. Let me clean my brush. And here's my orange. I'll drop that in here. Clean my brush. And I'll pick some of that up and put that over here. That's a little bit rich, but it's kind of the orange I want. So I'm going to now pick up a little bit of orange, move that to here, and I'm going to pick up some of my yellow, even maybe even some more concentrated yellow, and I'm going to move that over here. Now I've got a color that I think is going to be working well for me. I can test it on the microscope, or in this case, I'm just going to, since we're just dealing with a swatch here, I can come in and see what I want. Up a little bit more. And I'm liking what I see there. I need to be a little bit more concentrated, so I'll pick up some of that. Pick up more of this. Should have cleaned my brush first, but I know what I want. And there I am. Now I'm a little bit too orange, so I'm going to come right off the bat and I'm going to pull that off. I don't like what I'm seeing, so I'm going to come back. I want to dial that back a bit. The color I like, I want a little bit more dilution.
And this is all solvent, no shellac yet.
This is all shellac.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just
Yeah.
doing alcohol. Okay.
These are dyes also, correct, Doug?
These are dyes, yeah.
Is there at any point that would you be pulling pigments for something like this, or is that just too dicey on spruce?
Yes, it's I would be doing that. So this is kind of the color I'm seeing, and it's kind of the color I want. And so that's where I am, and that's in this well here. I'll keep working that in with what I've got, picking some up. Because remember the first thing.
How long is this good for? Could you come back like 10 days later and still use the same dry shellac on that?
This is why I call this dry staining, because most of this is already dry except for this. This is already dry. So if I want to activate more of that, I'll just take a little bit of alcohol, pick up some finish. I gotta get the brush wet first. Pick up some finish, a little bit of alcohol, pick up some finish, and I'll come in here and I can reactivate that color, get it on my brush, paint in what I want to paint in. If I need to work some back off, I can come like that, but getting a little bit too much is on the edges. More yellow now. Here I've got kind of a mix of my orange and my yellow, and this is actually the color that I think I'm going to be happy with coming in here, working my way. So that's kind of where we are in terms of getting that color a little bit deeper. It's a little yellow. I'm going to want to go a little bit more orange. Well, let's say now I want to try to recreate some of these dark lines in here. Now, after I'm here, I might just let this dry. I might even protect this with, a quick spray. I'll put a couple of pieces of tape on the sides of this, give it a spritz with shellac or with whatever lacquer or anything, just to create a barrier coat, and then come back. I've got my colors that I'm using. They're dry. I can either cover them with, almost knocked that over. I can cover them so that I'll get dust in that, and I can come back tomorrow if I'm done for the day, and I can come back and resume with whatever colors I was dealing with. So okay, I was in this neighborhood and this neighborhood is kind of where I was comfortable with and where I'm getting what I want. I can then put fresh fresh shellac in my original wells, and then just move on from there. This, just picking up a little bit of that, will reactivate whatever's already dry over here, or whichever color I'm grabbing.
Doug, where are those mixing palettes coming from? Is that, are you recycling those, or are those one and done kind of?
No, they're plastic, and the nice thing about them is if I get too far in and I say, you know what, I like this color, I like that color, but I really don't like this color and I really don't like that color, I'll just take a paper towel, get some alcohol on there. It's plastic, so I can get rid of that. And now I've got more space for more different colors or more different attempts at doing different things. So like I said before, if I had, I have this
I gotta get me some glass slides. Are those more of your dentist bounty, or were those order?
these I think I ordered. And it's like they last forever, and they you can constantly clean them, So here, I'm pretty close to the color I like. They get a little more wet. Now I'm pulling dry color with a wet brush, reactivating that. I'll always make sure that it's not too dark. I can come in here and I can paint what I want to get the look that I'm looking for. And the wet brush, anything that's a little too dark, I can come up and actually pick some of that color back up. If I've got a little bit of an orange line here that I don't like, I come by with a wet brush of just and I can go back. Make sure my brush is dry again. Make sure my brush is clean again. I'm ready for more color, what have you. So here I'm getting, I'm getting a little dark because I'm playing with it too much, but I'm getting close to the color I want. And I'm also hitting with too much solvent because we're talking more than we're. This would be, when I'm getting to this point, I would have probably gone all the way down to the crack 2, maybe 3 times with some kind of sealant between it. So I lock in my color. These here, these all here are dyes. These are pigments over here. So let's say I got something that I want to hide, or let's say if I want to go to a little bit of a brown so that I want to recreate some of these dark grain lines to kind of get some faux grain in there. I'm going to go with like a brown dye that's over here, and I'll start a new color. I'll also get myself something else to wipe again because that's getting pretty muddy. I'll get a fresh one of those. I'll get the color off the brush. Now that's changing that color, so it's time for me to really clean the brush before I move on. So here, I'm going to pick up some of the brown, move that over there. That's a little bit too red for my tastes. So I'm going to try this brown here. Is that brown? Yeah. That's probably closer to the brown that I want. Pick up a little bit of that, move that over here, and I'll get that diluted. Now, get a wet brush, pick up some of that brown that I'm looking for, and now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to try to get a little bit dark brown. I can come in with my finger, get it off there. I can come in with a dry Q-tip, get it off of there. So I don't want to remove the color. And I can create some of those faux darker patches. You know, if I'm trying to hide stuff that way and get, I don't know if I'm holding that right. There, you know, if I'm trying to recreate this kind of thing over here, you know, these dark lines over here, I'm trying to recreate those lines like that over there to mimic something that's going on. You can do that, lock in your color. If I have something that I'm trying to hide, let's say I've got a seam. Right there, like a dark line going cross grain. If I'm trying to hide something, that's where your pigments come in. You might take a straight white pigment. And I might even switch to a different brush. But I'll take either a straight white pigment. We've got like an antique white pigment. There's some yellow pigments and some like burnt umber pigments. And at that point, I'll just grab another one of these and start a fresh palette because I don't want to mix too many colors and too many different palettes. But for the sake of our discussion, I'm going to put a little bit of it down there instead. You see, I've got a little orange in there. Let me start over here. And that's why I don't want to mix. But yeah, this is an antique white. I want it a little whiter. So I'll put some more white in there. That's my antique white kind of. So now what I'm going to be doing is trying to fake a little bit of silk to hide. I'm going to grab here a little yellow. And I'm going to grab some of that. And then I'll come in and I'll give myself it's not sealed, but you'll get the idea that I can create. This is too light for our purposes, but now I can create something that's got a pigment in it that's a little bit opaque, and I can draw it out with either thinner solvent or just fresh shellac, and it'll cover something for me that I want to hide. Like if it's a hard grain line, or if it's a seam line, like at the end of your splint or something like that, you can cover that and it begins to disappear and you don't see, the hard line. And then you can go over that with color. So the pigments work nicely for being able to create something that's a little opaque underneath a sliver of, and you can see it starts to turn white, but you can't see through it. And then you go over the top of it, but it's still translucent, so you can still see grain through it. So those are a couple of the different ways that I like to use the dry stains to be able to move within a color. And if I really don't like everything that I'm seeing, since it's sealed, I can always come back and I can start
Please play
again.
very, very close attention, you younglings, that he's got that sealed. if you do that on an old guitar and you're wiping stuff everywhere.
Mhm.
It's probably a bad thing.
Yeah. And
Do you
that's
ever
exactly
use
what-
lacquer? Do you ever use lacquer for medium? I've almost never use it as a medium now. Like
I have, but I like how fast shellac dries
Yeah.
for me. You know,
Yeah.
so it's like if I do it with and you can do it with um with lacquer, but the problem is then weeks turn into months.
Yeah, weeks turn into months, and then you gotta be sitting there in a respirator.
Yeah, it's you got to deal with the gas off, you got to deal with the smells and all that kind of stuff. Um, but I just really like shellac for mixing colors in, getting it on, seeing what I'm doing, and realize what we were doing here. For me to get this color on, the same color as what I got here with whatever grain lines I'm in, I'm going to be that's going to be living in my finishing room for at least a couple of 3-4 weeks, because I'm going to get the yellow, that kind of light shimmery yellow that's in between the grain lines first, down and done, that I'm comfortable with. I'm going very light. I might even take 2 or 3 times to get that super light yellow, where here when I'm painting that on, I can see it, but you probably don't even perceive it, a change in color when it's that light. But I can see here from where my vantage point is, I've got a shade of yellow in here that I'm going to draw all the way down, and I'm going to let it sit. Now I'm going to do something else. And then once it's hardened, I can either come back with a fresh brush and go over it, or if I can say, before I darken it, I'll protect it again. And the whole idea of us being in that well is that we get to build a color up towards the top of the finish that not only has that we can dial in a color. I'm never going to try to sit here, take a bunch of different colors and try to get my final color, especially if I'm doing it this way, where I'm going to try to get my final color and get it all in one swipe, because then I'm just chasing a dream. That's never going to happen in one sitting.
It's
I'd rather take the time to let it be itself, and I can build a color up to the surrounding finish by layers of yellow. Let me put a little bit of orange in there. Let me get a little bit of grain here. Oh, I've got a pimple that I want to get rid of there. I've got a cross line that I want to diffuse. Sometimes I'll come in if I've got a seam for the end of my splint that I want to hide and diffuse and make it look like it's like, just like we were saying before, how in the manufacturing setting, you have all sorts of repairs underneath that finish that, for all intent and purposes, they look like defects in the wood.
Mhm.
So I want it to look like a little bit of silk, or I want it to look like just a little bit of a cloudy spot that, is natural to the wood. And I'll get that. And sometimes I'll come in and I'll just do that spot and say, okay, you know what? That looks good. I'll leave it till tomorrow. I'll go do something else. I got 20 other guitars in the touch-up room to go touch up, or I got how many refrets that I'm after. So I've got that spot for that seam done. I can come back tomorrow after not only it's all dry, I can look at it with fresh eyes and say, you know what? I think I can do better than that. And I can take it off and try it again. But if I keep committing to dropping more color on, this eventually is going to look like a finger painting that you took home from grammar school.
Yeah,
You know?
that's really hard for young Lutz to, trust the process over multiple days is very tough. It's tough to get to the end of, like, especially if you spend hours just getting it to the first day, letting it go, and then go thinking 3 days from now that's going to be something. That's a tough thing to get your head around.
Benefit here is that all of these colors that I was satisfied with are still here. They'll be dry, and they're dry now. This is dry to the touch. I can't pick that up. But if I come back with a wet brush tomorrow, I can pick that up. Well, that way. I can pick that up. I don't know if it's in your view or not. There we go. I can pick that up and I can reactivate it, and it's the same color, that I left it with. So that's the same color that I had when I was drawing the grain lines yesterday. So that's the nice thing about dry staining. A little bit light. Normally I'll use a little bit more shellac and a little bit more color so that there isn't just a hint of it here. It's more like this, more like I've got a good amount of color that I can come back and activate very easily. And all of that will come back to its, wet, slurry, and you go through a lot of thinner. This, if you're cleaning a brush with this, you just might as well, I don't know, you might as well not even clean the brush because this is contaminated at this point. You go through a lot of thinner. I change my thinner almost constantly just because I want a constantly clean brush.
Does anybody have any questions? We've been at this for like 2.5 hours. We should probably get. But just really briefly, does anybody have any questions about what they've seen so far?
Yeah, I got one quick one. Early on, you were talking about how if you feel inside the guitar with the low end of the wedge and stuff like that, you were going to take care of it with cleaning. So what do? You just do a quick cleanup inside the guitar?
Yeah, after everything's dry, I'll go inside depending on how much of the cleat is coming through on the bottom, you can either knock it off, snap it. You can, if you need to go in with a knife. With the lattice guitar, there was no way I was going to get in there with a knife between the lattice, but you can go in there with a magnet and sand it flush, and you'll get it clean with the bottom of the guitar. You don't want the cleat, hanging inside the guitar and just being a wedge sticking out. You want to clean it up to the bottom side of the guitar so it's flat with the underside of the guitar. Then I'll put cleats to support it along its length so that it's stable and so that I'm not dealing with the top that wants to come apart, as it goes not humidified, or if it changes a lot with the seasons, or if they live in Connecticut and they think a guard father is a really good humidifier for the case.
Yeah. Otherwise, you have to say that you just installed a small, tiny brace or something in there.
What, to the customer? Yeah, I'll tell them there are cleats in there.
Yeah.
No,
No,
you don't want that thing hanging because it'll be something that later somebody's going to try to mess with, and you might wind up losing part of your cleat too.
Yeah.
All right then. Well, Doug,
About any of this?
this was pretty awesome, man. Not pretty awesome. It was very awesome. Thanks for sharing this with us. I'm gonna definitely get back. I use my airbrush an awful lot. It's been some time since I've really gotten to go with the paintbrush. I got that stupid Epiphone. I gotta paint that pickup hole out of though. So I'm gonna get my shellac and my brushes going for that again. But thanks, man.
Try, man.
We might buy out the
everybody
rest of
unmute
the
and say-
Qualisol market because there really isn't a lot of that stuff left.
What's that? A lot of
So
what
we might
stuff?
buy out all the rest of the Qualisol market because that's a discontinued product.
Yeah, Qualisol's done.
So yeah,
I
bought a
bought
bunch
like
of-
5 of them like a half a year ago because I realized it was a discontinued product.
All right. Well, everybody have a safe Halloween. Don't eat too much of that candy that the kids do. We don't ever get kids anymore, and we get all this candy. So it's like I'm gonna be sick tomorrow morning from eating candy. But I'll talk to you all later, and have a good rest of your Sunday.
Thank you, Doug.
Hey, thanks,
Thanks,
Doug.
Doug. Thanks a lot, guys.
Awesome, man.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Thanks, Doug.